Shimada, a young Japanese lady. I knew her very well. She was also instrumental in recruiting me into Mahikari. Propaganda material, the lectures that they hold to recruit people, it's all about organic vegetables, good health, creating a utopian society. The higher you go, it gets completely opposite. I joined in the early days. It was very relaxed. It was a lovely community of people because amongst us there were politicians, doctors, all kinds of people, and a lot of these people had been in various other organisations, as was very common in the 70s. So we felt very home and relaxed about it. And of course, being Oriental, we didn't have the internet in those days, so anything Oriental was fabulous, exciting. How could we resist? So it brought about a feeling of peace. We'd found something we'd been looking for, and of course we were all encouraging each other that wow, this is great, and so we all stayed with it for many years. Well, I was in there for about 15 years, and as time progressed, the Japanese influence grew stronger. There was a bit of resistance to this, but we were told that, well, this is the way we're going to do it, that the Japanese or the Oriental way is superior than ours. So we kind of accepted it and just went along with it. Increased our commitment, financial commitment, our recruiting, higher level citizens were joining, politicians, and but after many years in there, I began to question, well, who was going to lead this new utopian society? They talked about we're the chosen ones, which is a very common theme throughout all religions. The Christians have the chosen ones. It's a common thing, so we saw nothing unusual in that. But I think we were blinded by all this excitement because for all those years, none of us ever questioned, well, who is going to preside over this new utopian society? After several years, we're being told things like, well, firstly, only the Mahikari people are going to survive this coming Armageddon. It was actually a Doomsday cult, we found out, not a utopian cult. They were more obsessed with this Doomsday that was going to arrive any day, and the only survivors were going to be the dedicated Mahikari people. And because most people in the cult were Japanese, it then began to take a direction that it's the main surviving, the pinnacle of this was going to be in Japan. And after all those years, you begin to take on these beliefs because you'd been there so long. The cult was who you were. It represents who you were. So, and there was a lot of incentive to stay with that belief because they had mechanisms, mental mechanisms you could call them, to keep you there. For example, if you questioned anything or left, it was an indication that, well, you were disturbed or possessed by evil spirits. Or if you did leave, you were creating heavy karma for you and your family, because we were gradually led to believe that it was us that was going to save civilization. And if we failed in that mission, well, can you imagine the heavy burden that was on our shoulders? So how could you leave? Of course, if you were told this on the day you joined, you would just laugh it off. But when you've been there several years, dedicating yourself, it's not so easy. And some friends of mine came back from Japan who were also in Mahikari, and they discovered that some things concerning the founder of the cult were not quite as they seemed, or not quite as we had been told. So I went back to Japan as a private citizen and did my own investigation. You must remember, in those days there was no internet, so what we were told, there was nothing to compare it with. There was no other documentation, so we had basically blind belief or blind faith. So I went back to find out for myself, and there I discovered that the leader of the cult, Yoshikazu Okada, been in other cults, had been tossed out for supposedly sexually abusing the other members of that cult. He plagiarized all his divine teachings that we were being fed. And then we found out that he was a military man, ex-military man. He was a military school instructor before the war and during the war for some time. He owned an aircraft factory, a huge military aircraft factory, 66,000 square meters, where he made aeroplanes and bombs. He was the personal bodyguard to the emperor himself and his brother, Prince Chichibu, and that's a rank, that's a position reserved for the most dedicated or as fanatical militarists. Anyway, as the war approached, he transferred out of the Imperial Guards, the Japanese Imperial Guards, and became and prepared himself for the forthcoming invasion of China, which he boasts greatly about. Yoshikazu Okada, he was a lieutenant colonel. He was in charge of much of the transport and logistics of the invasion of China, particularly around the Nanjing area. After I had left the cult for about 10 years, the cult, for some crazy reason, published in English a book of his memoirs and stories and commentary by people that knew him. So I got a copy of this. I'd been out of the cult for 10 or more years by now. And in there I found quotes about how he boasts about his role in the invasion of China, particularly Nanjing. And he talks about how he looks forward to his rejoining his comrades in the heat of battle in Nanjing. Comments like this. He says that for a short period he was admitted to a hospital in Nanjing for influenza, where he laments about his love affairs with some of the Chinese nurses in hospital. And I think that's just military speak for raping the Chinese nurses. But let me find a comment here. These are his words himself in this English publication. "I would not think of death until the surrender of Hanchao. I wondered about my comrades in the extreme of action in the bloody world of Nanjing. I prayed that I might stand on that battlefield one more time." So here he's admitting or boasting about his role in Nanjing and how to him it was a glorious divine mission from his point of view. And he boasts about how he was transferred from the Imperial Guards in order to play a role in the forthcoming invasion of China and then later Indochina. He became, these are now the words of the commentary of a friend in the same publication. The Japanese 10th Division, which included Mr. Okada and his 1st Railway Division, attacked Nanjing. And he laments, "This was a fateful time for Mr. Okada, who held such a responsible position in the Japanese armed forces." Absolutely. And not only that, he was making the aeroplanes and the ordnance for the attack. Here's another quote from that same publication, and these are his words. "By the grace of God, my companies mysteriously grew very rapidly." He's making the aeroplanes and the armaments, and he's out there using them as well. it didn't make him a war criminal. Perhaps while he was in hospital he escaped or had an alibi, but his second in command, the second in command of the cult when he started it, and his name is Mr. Tomomori. He was a convicted Class A war criminal, and he was sentenced to death because of his role in the beheading of 33 prisoners of war. They were American Air Force pilots, and this was after the armistice had been signed. So he was sentenced to death. But like a lot of these guys, after a few years in jail, they let them all go. This Mr. Tomomori was his confidant, co-founder. I actually met him. I shook his hand, and. So, you know, when I think about it, it's hard to recognise a mass murderer in the first instance, but I shook his hand. He was very polite, well dressed. Well, the whole cult centres around this Armageddon, so it needs its Armageddon to fulfil its promises and destiny. So if at the end of the day there's no Armageddon, there's no cult. It's like you can't change your teachings midstream. Shintaro Ishihara is a personal friend of Yoshikazu Okada, the cult leader. He's a member of Mahikari, like his son, who's in charge of Fukushima. And it was him that started all this dispute, because that's anything to hopefully bring about some kind of Armageddon. Well, having delved into this over the years, trying to figure out why and who fits and who, I've come to the conclusion that this is just the reigniting of the Japanese emperor worship, the cult of emperor worship. This is probably not the only such cult. I think the Aum Shinrikyo probably has some. They're connected, by the way. Some members are in both camps, and some of the high-level politicians in. I know I'm digressing. In the Aum cult are also in the Mahikari cult. Same ideology, same.
Sarin nerve gas was released on the Tokyo subway during the morning rush hour, choking and blinding 5,500 people, killing 11. The attack, we now know, was part of a much larger plot aimed no less at overthrowing the Japanese state and starting a world war. These are the people being held responsible. 6 years ago, a near-blind acupuncturist, Shoko Asahara, founded the Aum Shinrikyo, or Supreme Truth.
I think life is meant to be a journey of self-discovery, not where your thoughts of these important matters, that part of the brain becomes atrophied and you just listen to what you're told and that's it. You have to think. Well, that's a big mistake. People must learn to think for themselves and unravel these mysteries for themselves. I think that's one of our main life purposes. It's not to make money to go to the shopping mall or to go to the local church. It's not that. Of course you can go to a shopping centre, but in most countries of the world, on the weekends, they hang out at the shopping centre looking for some kind of false sense of satisfaction. You may find a little bit of satisfaction in the early days, but that will wear off, particularly when your debts start mounting up. Then you're trapped. Instant gratification, but gratification has to be throughout your... it's got to be a lifelong, slow path of satisfying your soul, you could say. Instead of relying on other people to do everything for you, including your thinking. And your pathway to heaven, you have to find that yourself. Work on it. Absolutely. So many things in our, I assume, Eastern culture and Western now, it's prepared for you to do nothing. It's all there. You don't have to do anything. Just think what we tell you to think, do what we tell you to spend on fashion. These are the clothes you're going to wear. This is the fashion this year. All facets of our life are taken care of. So we've lost the ability to think for ourselves, choose for ourselves.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you.
During the early years of the 1960s rock and roll scene at Liverpool, not very far away, the seaside town of Blackpool was the home of the Blackpool School of Arts. Total enrollment, 50 students. Australian art student Garry Greenwood arrived there to study photography and learn many of the various arts which we will be later known for. Upon graduation, every graduating class is expected to do a prank. And they chose the greatest prank in the history of Blackpool, which was to place a dummy of the Loch Ness Monster in the actual Loch Ness in Scotland, nearby Scotland. And of course they chose the foreigner, Garry, to row the raft that was to pull the Loch Ness Monster. And luckily, he wasn't arrested. Okay. Upon returning to Australia, he began a career as a sculptor and also became a talented watercolorist, among many other jobs, including his profession, which he learned at Blackpool, photography. Okay. And then he heard about the wonderful New Age movement from Japan called Mahikari.